The question I'm going to address here now is, why has democracy lost ground to fascism globally over the past generation or so? And um, like with the introduction to my previous uh, video just a short while ago about lumping Jefferson Davis and Donald Trump together as destruct losers who become destructive heroes to the people. Just as with that, I'm more into exploring the question that gets raised. You see that in country after country, and there's some outfit that monitors democracies has said, since 2006, democracy has steadily lost ground. So I think I want to go back to when Russia started off in the direction of a democracy with Yeltsin and his drunken way of ruling, and then handed it over to Putin, who ended democracy. So if you go back that far, it's been a clear tendency in the world at large that democracy is losing ground. So why? Why? Um, uh, I've indicated that there's a mystery here for me, in that countries that seem to have no connection with each other, like Brazil, Turkey, Israel, India, they all made some unfortunate movement in the direction of autocracy, dictatorship, authoritarian, fascist. Why would that happen? And if you look at the polls around the world these days, even in societies that are still pretty thoroughly democratic, the governments are unpopular. It's true in France, I know that. It's true in Great Britain. Um, there's just a reputation of democracy seems to be impaired. Uh, and there are all kinds of questions that can arise when you look at something like that. Um, in the case of, say, France, where the government is very unpopular, uh, they're not unpopular because of fascism. They seem to have lost ground uh, on their own. Uh, Governments didn't used to be so unpopular as they are now. Why is the British Conservative Party failed that country so terribly as it has, uh, with the Brexit thing? Uh, and they've just made a mess of the country over the last, well, since the financial crisis. It's really, and if there were election held now, it looks like they would be obliterated practically. And in the meanwhile, the Labour Party has had trouble casting itself in a particularly appealing form. Certainly when, what's his name, the guy before the Sturmer now, but um, the name escapes me. Um, but, I wouldn't have voted Labour with him as leader. And I generally root for Labour over the half century I've been rooting one way or another, even though I'm a big Churchill fan. But that was World War II. So what's going on with democracy? I think that part here are my limited thoughts about it. America has been the world's leading democracy. Not necessarily the best or most democratic, but we're the most powerful. We play a leadership role. We're the people the country that the French sent the Statue of Liberty to. You know, we started the whole thing. We're the champion of democracy in the world. We haven't been doing very well. W's administration brought made a made a mess out of almost every component of the American scene. By the time they left office, we were involved in this terrible war that they'd lied us into. We had a financial crisis that the Republican-appointed feds, hadn't warned what was coming with the housing bubble and these mortgage securities that were just time bombs, and our international reputation in shatters, in tatters and shreds, because of the way we had arrogantly launched and arrogantly botched an invasion of another important sovereign country, Iraq. And then when Barack Obama was elected, the party that had given us that presidency gave us a Congress that made its number one priority to make the president fail. And we had a Democratic president who knew so little about how to fight an opponent like that they basically were able to obstruct him across the board and actually make him into a failure, notwithstanding that he won re-election. And he did accomplish a few things. But he wasn't nearly the transformative president that he had as his ambition to be, and that America would have so benefited from his being, because the Republicans in Congress were able to obstruct him across the board, drive him back to just executive actions, and he wasn't able to make them pay a political price for doing that. So we were immobile. The W people brought us catastrophes and only a few reasonably decent accomplishments. The Obama administration passed health insurance, but it was a little less than it ideally would have been, but it was definitely an important and necessary step. But then was unable to get anything done in terms of climate change and this and that. He was frustrated across the board because he didn't know how to fight. And the Republicans were able to behave in an indefensible way without having to defend it. So a democracy which was accomplishing very little for a number of years. I mean, we could go back before the election of W and talk about what was and wasn't accomplished by Clinton as a centrist Democrat, and stuff like that. And there's a lot of things that can be said, but basically, America had been a country that was making progress, that you could believe that we were making progress. And then the world saw us both as something of a rogue nation under W. And then they were so thrilled with Obama that 100,000 people went to hear him talk in Berlin, and they gave him a Nobel Prize before he even had a chance to do anything. But all that didn't really come. The hopes did not get fulfilled. And then you get to Trump. So the champion of democracy played its cards really badly We lost international power and stature with the war in Iraq. We blew it in our. We poured a lot of energy and money and lives into Afghanistan and ended up accomplishing pretty much nothing. And meanwhile, there was a champion of fascism on the world scene. Vladimir Putin, I'll tell you, I watched him and I was impressed. Not favorably impressed with what he represented, but I'm impressed with him as sort of like a Russian chess player. He was dealt a pretty weak hand. I think some commentary about him before the invasion of Ukraine, for sure. They said that he played a weak hand well. So, as fascism is gaining ground, we've got a world scene in which the champion of democracy is discredited and is losing power and status. And the champion of fascism, this chess player in Moscow, is gradually building the power that the Russians had lost at the end of the Cold War. He was gradually building this thing by getting a port on the Mediterranean. With the alliance he made with the Syrians, so that he props up this butcher, the Bashar Assad. In exchange, he gets this broad Park Place Broadway piece of real estate that can make Russia a Mediterranean naval power. And he grabs a little bit of the republic, what had been the former Soviet Socialist Republic of Georgia. He grabs a bit of that, and then he grabs, let's see, what did he grab next? Wasn't there something between that and Ukraine? Anyway, he ends up grabbing a part of Ukraine and then grabbing the Crimea that the Treaty of 1993 had given to Ukraine. He takes it back by force. So he was on the comeback trail. And I hypothesize that one of the implications of this is that democracy is being that the whole world is watching all this. We've got this larger battle between democracy, top down and bottom up, and it basically tracks well with what I say you can reasonably call good and evil. But in any event, fascism, democracy, tyranny, and freedom, we got that going on all over the world. And that's been going on. I don't know how far back in history to go, but certainly in the history of our times, the democracy starting in America, the French Revolution with its unfortunate defects that didn't make it lead into much of a democracy. This has been a progressive thing. Out of the pattern of tyranny that was the original pattern of the empires of full-blown civilizations, there gradually emerges this idea of democracy, which spreads around the world. So that even Putin conducts elections. Ivan the Terrible never conducted elections. What is that word? The hypocrisy is the flattery that vice gives to virtue, or something like that. So Europe, Western Europe, for example, they're all democracies. A lot of countries in this world are democracies now. That wasn't true 400 years ago. But this thing has arisen, and it's an attempt to change the world from a place where the ruling power can exploit the people, which has been pretty much what we've had most of the places, most of the time for the last, I don't know, 5,000 years, maybe more, into a world in which the people are given the tools to make good decisions, and out of the people's will is constituted the power of the state to be wielded in ways that are for the people and by the people and not just of the people. So that's a major dynamic about the world. It's not the only dynamic, but it's what's at stake in American elections of this 2024. And a lot of it's what's at stake also in the battles over who's going to govern Israel and who's going to govern. Anyway, this is a long-standing battle, and we've lost ground in that. And I think part of the reason is that the United States has not been doing that well with its democracy. We can talk about why that is, and I would say it's because the force of fascism has gained in the United States. And why has that been? That's another question that could be pursued, but I'm not going to pursue it right now. The point is that in the United States, as the United States got immobilized, so that, for example, by Clinton's presidency, we've got a somewhat normal liberal president who's nonetheless fighting a defensive battle. The scrimmage line is moving back toward liberalism's end zone, as you can see in some of the legislation that was passed, like about crime and like that. But meanwhile, there's also arising on the right something that has to be troubling to anybody who's studied political systems, and in this context of top down and bottom up. Clinton won the presidency fair and square. In the American tradition, there is an obligation to sort of accept that that's the outcome of the election. You can always fight the next time around, but he's the president. He's the guy the American people chose to be president. But already then, on the right, there was something rising. They did not treat Clinton as a legitimate president. It has been since Carter that the Republican Party has recognized as legitimate a Democratic president. They didn't have to when it was Reagan after Carter, and then Bush the first after, and then came Clinton. And we can see that something's happening on the right that wasn't just politics as usual. On the one hand, we've got these right-wing media that are basically demonizing Clinton. I mean, he is a bit of a scoundrel. Yeah, okay. But he wasn't leaving a trail as a serial murderer. You know, that's what they were selling on the right-wing radio. I don't think anybody ever did that to JFK or LBJ or Jimmy Carter. But the next Democratic president, they did too. And they were looking for, at the congressional level, they kept on looking for a way of destroying his presidency, not respecting that, okay, we're operating in a constitutional system. The people have hired this guy to be president. That's a very important role. There's a whole section of the Constitution about what his role is. And we have to respect that. If we respect the American people, we got to respect that he's been hired to do that job. No, they didn't. They wanted to destroy his presidency. You get the investigation into the real estate thing. That's the Whitewater thing, and they get this guy, Kenneth Starr, Star Chamber. I don't. I suppose if I did my research about who Kenneth Starr is, I'd find out some stuff that I'd like to know. But there's something amiss about the way he played his role. And I'm guessing that if you look deep into it, you would find a lot of stuff that's akin to a fascist spirit. And my guess is that he doesn't think that he did anything wrong, but I don't know. I mean, there are the knowing scoundrels, and then there are the pious ones who are really hypocrites and don't know it. I think he's the latter. Now, Newt Gingrich, well, the way he went after Clinton on infidelity, when we know he must know that he's being a hypocrite, because we found out later that he was doing much worse in terms of marital ethics and sexual ethics and stuff like that than what Clinton was doing at the very time that he was condemning. So there's a fascist spirit. I'm guessing also the fascist spirit is not necessarily a dishonest one. Alito is another case in point. I think Alito thinks he's doing God's work. I think he's like the Grand Inquisitor. I don't mean Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. That one seems to be, but I think that the Inquisition in Spain in the time of the rising of the religious wars of Europe, they really believed that they were doing God's work as they tortured people and killed people and stuff like that. So I believe, not an expert. I call myself a comprehensivist. I'm not a specialist. And people will say, well, are you a generalist? And then somebody once taught me a word. Well, what you are is a comprehensivist. And I don't know if that word's anywhere else. But a generalist might be like somebody who'd play Jeopardy and do well. The name of the lake in Mexico that Bill Murray's watching on Groundhog Day. I can do okay in those things, but my real work has always been trying to put the pieces together, and that's what the comprehensivist is about. So, where should we go from there? American democracy doing poorly for however you want to explain how that went, and I'm not satisfied with that explanation. I think we should also look into what have we been able to deliver for the American people, and there may be some cultural degradation that's more systemic. That there's something about the whole culture that's lost some of the power that it used to be able to give to the better causes. I don't know. Maybe I'll look at that in a minute or some minutes. But in any event, the world looked upon this not very edifying show going on in the world's leading democracy. And then it looked at the way this guy over in Moscow, who is a dictator, even when he wasn't president for one term, it was his right-hand man who was his puppet, Medvedev, or however you pronounce it. This guy owned the country, and they were bilking the whole country for billions and billions of dollars in this kleptocracy, and he was advancing the power of his country and the status of his country. So if the whole country, the world is watching this, I don't know if this is something that happened or not, but I'm imagining that there's a prestige gain for the power that's advancing and a prestige loss for the power that's sort of failing to get the job done. And that the result is that a lot of people who are running governments around the world looking for how can we enhance our standing in the world say, oh, well, it looks like this guy Putin's come up with a pretty good way of doing it. This democracy thing seems like it can't get anything done. But if we establish ourselves as a kind of not a pluralistic society, but a dictatorial, authoritarian society, we can advance and achieve our purposes like Putin seems to be doing. So I think that those are possible contributors. I'm not satisfied, but that explains a whole lot of it. But also, it does show really how important it is for the good of the world that Putin's aggression in Ukraine fail. Because here's a situation where this guy who's been advancing some ugly things from Syria and supporting the worst in the Western democracies, like Le Pen's right-wing movement in France, and I'm not sure if they played a role in Brexit, but they helped give us Trump here in the United States. We know that. So we don't know whether countries are looking at this thing. But to make Putin fail, and he misjudged in so many ways. He misjudged Ukrainians, he misjudged the Ukrainians, he misjudged the government, Zelensky, he misjudged Biden, he misjudged the Western allies, he misjudged the whole free world's ability to rally against him. That kind of misjudgment, I mean, that should cost him plenty. And that kind of thing, I think, can reverse the movement toward fascism away from democracy. Which is why it's such a shame that the force of fascism that's in the American power system right now, in the form of the part of the Republicans in the House of Representatives that are calling the shots, are managing to block aid to Ukraine, so that they're losing hard-won territory for lack of the stuff that we should have been sending them months ago. You can see that the whole world is an avenue in which the powers of fascism and the powers of democracy are embattled, and things have not been going as well as we might like. And this election in 2024, I think, is going to be an opportunity where this gets turned around really well. And certainly 2020 made a big difference. I mean, if Trump had won that election, as bad as things are, I imagine how he'd be if somehow the election of 2020 had gone the other way. There's one other thing about that I think might be a systemic thing. I mean, by systemic, I mean, so we got something happening globally. It's not obvious that there are interconnections among them. I mean, there are some, like Putin, helping a lot of different groups around the world to advance fascism, but mostly these are happening out of the nations themselves, and it's not clear why. What are the global forces at work that are operating so that even Sweden, oh, there's a clue. And then you look at France, and what do these two places have in common where the fascist side has been gaining power? And in Sweden's case, the far right is even the ruling group, but not yet in France, but they're gaining in power. Well, what do they have in common? And what about I don't know if Brexit belongs in. I mean, I always lump Brexit together with all this advance of brokenness. Whether it's a fascistic expression, whether it should be seen as part of that same battle, I'm not sure. That's another question I'd like to look into. But it feels like it to me somehow. And so in country after country, you get to see something's gaining. And in every case, well, not every case, not Israel. They've got their own problems. But immigration. I mean, right now we've got somebody with the last name Mussolini, I believe, or she's from that line of genetics, I mean, she's done a decent job as far as I can see from a distance without paying a lot of attention. She's been a decent European, but it has been a far right takeover in Italy, and there's a far right takeover in Sweden, and there's a rise of a far right movement in Germany, and there's been a far right takeover in Hungary, and then there's that French thing, and then there's Brexit, which I think is part of the same picture. And so you could ask yourself, well, what do they have in common? And I think that the answer is immigration, or at least part of the answer is immigration. So we seem to have entered into an era in which there are waves of immigration for a lot of different reasons, it seems. I mean, there's what's happened in Libya produced a big wave of immigration. There's persecution from authoritarian regimes in Central America, producing a wave of immigration toward the north. There's a Syrian civil war that produced the wave of immigration that destabilized Germany ultimately. And I don't mean destabilized it, but it was the biggest problem ever encountered by Angela Merkel because she opened the door. And in reaction to it, Orban rose in Hungary and gave them a illiberal democracy to replace the more liberal democracy that there had been. And it was a lot about the issue of immigration. And of course, Trump, build a wall, make the Mexicans pay for it, all that garbage. But there really is an issue somehow globally. I mean, in France, there are major suburbs that are inhabited by immigrants. I mean, there are Arab suburbs of Paris that explode every once in a while. I don't know a lot about those things. I really just read about it when there's an explosion, and then the journalists tell us something about the unemployment rates and about the legislation that French have, the whole business about, France makes it kind of clear that part of the deal is people want their nation to be more than just an address. And they get upset if there are people who are not clamoring to fit into the culture that's already there. If it doesn't matter whether people have signed on to some kind of an agreed thing, then what is a country? And people care about that. I'm definitely of a liberal bent on those issues, but there are challenges for a society. Clearly, it's just a fact that societies don't easily absorb immigrants that are very different from them. You can fault people for that. It's not evenly distributed across the ideological spectrum. But the reality is that it's not difficult, it's not easy to integrate people into a culture that's got what people want their culture to have in terms of coherence and not just an address. It's not easy to integrate people who are uh, of a different variety in their language or their cultural values, and a lot of French people, for example, have felt that the Arab population in their midst wasn't working well enough to become French. And I don't know exactly how true that is, but I think there's probably some truth. Here in America, we've been very good at integrating. And a lot of people were afraid about the Irish. They brought Catholicism here, and then they were afraid about the Chinese and the Mexicans and the Jews and the Poles and all the Italians and all the people that came here. And then within a few generations, America has become something that's taken good stuff from all these groups and made a rich tapestry that isn't just incoherent. So we believe in that, and we have been pretty good at doing it. But clearly, there's been a lot of immigration into the United States since what, the 1960s? Is that when the law was passed, making it easier? I think there's a higher proportion of America right now is foreign born than at any time since, pretty far back. A lot of people, particularly of a conservative mindset, are made very uncomfortable about that. And then in addition, you run into, since it's difficult to integrate, the people who have immigrated can sometimes create problems also. Though the crime rate among the current crop of immigrants, I guess, is lower than with American born. But still, there are problems that occur, like in Sweden, I think, and maybe in Denmark too. There's a sense in which they've got more of a crime problem because of the immigration. I'm no expert on immigration, but I do believe that the evidence shows that when there's a lot of immigration, there is a tendency for the politics of the country that is absorbing a high number of immigrants to move in the direction of fascism. I mean, there are problems that people have in dealing with anything different from themselves, and the more rigid the personalities, the more closed-minded, the less capable of celebrating human diversity people are, and the more they insist that God said it, I believe it, and that settles it, the more difficult it will be for them to feel as they look around the country and they see that there are signs in some language that's not English, and say, oh, well, their children will be speaking English. Now, my grandparents came over here not speaking English. They spoke Yiddish and Russian. But my parents were very fluent in English. My mother taught English and World Lit. My father was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I got brought up by them. And English. It's hard for me to imagine anybody doesn't think in English. But it doesn't take long in a country that opens itself up to find ways of integrating people. But it's a struggle, and there's only so much that a society can digest at a time, it seems. And we have to take as a given that not everybody is going to feel comfortable under the same circumstances, and that for certain people of a certain mindset, the presence of immigrants arouses feelings in them that a fascist force can harness for their political purposes. We might wish it isn't true. And we might try to change our society so that there are fewer people who feel threatened by that kind of thing. And there's always improving things, but it seems to be a reality that we really shouldn't have a world in which there are huge waves of migration. And that tells us that if we want to defend democracy, part of the job will be to make the world a more stable place. And that includes, for example, transforming the regimes of Central America in a direction that will make people not feel like they got to flee for a country that doesn't want immigrants and doesn't want so many immigrants. It means that the issue of climate change is going to relate quite directly to the protection of democratic values against fascistic values, because climate change generates waves of immigration in. The Syrian civil war is said to have been ultimately in the chain of cause and effect, caused by climate change and drought and then some political developments around that thing that led ultimately to the civil war, which led to huge numbers of millions of people actually that had lived in Syria then going to Turkey that doesn't want all them, and going up into Europe that doesn't want them. So we got a reason to stabilize regimes that are livable for their people, and to stabilize the climate that doesn't destabilize, so that famines and droughts and things like that drive whole hordes of people toward anything desperate to avoid starvation or what might happen to them. So that in that respect, I have a piece on my website, abetterhumanstory.org, that's about the question of why has democracy lost ground to fascism. And this immigration issue is not in it. The thing about the rising prestige of the fascist dictator in Moscow, who's the champion of fascism in the first 2 decades of this millennium, and the falling prestige of the American champion of democracy over those same 2 decades. In addition to that, I would now add the matter of immigration. And I'm not saying what our policy should be on immigration. I'm just saying we should recognize that it has effects that we don't want. The reality seems to be that fascism will be strengthened by excess of immigration into a democracy. And we don't want that. So we got to take that into account, whatever we do. But I still think that that there are other things going on that I don't understand. Is there something wrong with what democracy has been delivering intrinsically? I mean, I don't mean like. I mean, if Biden had been allowed to be the transformative president that he wanted to be, and that he had, I think, the intelligence and the vision to have been, if he had only been able to accomplish things, would that have delivered for the American people the kind of good progress that would feed our hearts and feel like affirming this is a way to run a country. I, I wonder, again, this is not me asserting something. I do wonder whether democracy as it existed in, say, the America I was growing up in, you know, in a market society and whatever you want to say about this society, that maybe it wasn't delivering so well to meet human needs. Um, I don't think that's the case, but I would at least look at it. Is it possible that people have a need for something that's more deeply meaningful than what was being provided by liberal democracy? Uh, I think the idea of liberal democracy is that each person in this society is able to find their own ways into a meaningful life with their own relationships and their own calling in the world, and uh, free to believe what they want to believe and free to organize their lives as they want to. And it doesn't have to be um, a collective mission. Beyond, well, but we do have some collective mission. We've always, as a country, had a collective mission. The city on the hill that goes way back. You know, that's in the New Testament, I think, and it's in the people who settled the New World and wanted to be a city on the hill, and then Ronald Reagan brought it back in. We've always had that sense that we were a society that shone a beacon. I lit my lamp beside the golden door. Freedom itself was enough to be actually a beacon. And the way we did our business was a beacon that we would be free to have our own spiritual visions, freedom of religion, the state not imposing on the society as a whole any religious point of view, but allowing people to find their own path. Well, you know, that sounds pretty good to me. I bet it would have sounded pretty good to anybody in those societies of centuries past where heretics got burned at the stake. I don't know. I don't think that our society has had need of continued improvement, but there's no inherent limit, I don't think, to the democratic method. When FDR gets up there and gives his I See in America speech, he sees all kinds of things that are basically utopian, that are sacred values. I see in America, and he describes one thing after another. There is no break upon what a democracy can provide for people. There's just a failure for the democracy to work the way it ideally could. Well, that's what I think. That's sort of a conclusion I'm coming to. The democracy didn't let us down. Democracy just wasn't defended well enough. And I've been over, you know, how it's a systemic problem. The battle between democracy and fascism has only gotten to this point because the immune system that the forces of democracy were supposed to provide against the virus of fascism was just too blind and too weak to do the job. So I'm not going to go down that. But you know, the failure of democracy isn't just because of the rise of fascism. It's been because of the weakness of the forces of democracy. Yeah, we really need to be able to envision things the way they actually are. If a force of evil, if you want to call it that, don't have to call it that. But if this coherent force that's risen on the right, a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse, if that takes over one of our political parties, it falls to the other political party to see what's happening and to fight the fight to preserve the American democracy against something that's been taken over that is antithetical to American democracy. And that's what's happened over the last 30 years. And liberal America has played its role, which is the failure to play its proper role as the immune system that kills the virus before it gets this powerful. So we are fighting for, in this 2024 election for American democracy. And American democracy's victory here is essential for the victory of democracy on a global level. I mean, if there is no leader of the free world, because Trump has won, that's one avenue forward for humanity, and not a pretty one, as far as I can see. If, however, the forces of democracy kick Trump and the Trump force and the force of fascism into oblivion, that will fortify the force of democracy and all the goodness that that force represents. And humankind will have a whole lot better chance in the generations to come to get its act together. If the world is dominated by a fascist guy in Beijing like Xi, and a fascist guy in Moscow like Putin, and a fascist guy like Trump in the United States, what kind of path forward do you think we're going to get? But if the world is governed by an alliance of free societies that was able to win the Cold War with America as the leader of the free world, and is able to win, make Putin fail in Ukraine and deter China from invading Taiwan, I think we got a decent chance to meet the challenge and get our act together as human civilization in time to prevent our self-destructing. So I know democracy has lots of problems. And I know that people sometimes have said about a fascist regime, he made the trains run on time. But overall, I think a very compelling case can be made that in the choice between democracy and fascism, one is life-serving and one is life-destroying. One is spreads combines power with wholeness. The other combines power with brokenness. One of them acts like a force of good in the world on balance, and the other seems consistently to make the world more broken. Good against evil. Will human civilization survive on this planet? It's a toss-up, I think. I would like it if anybody who would want to know what the nature of the forces are at work in determining whether human civilization survives or not, go take a look at my effort, which I think puts some things in an importantly different light, on a betterhumanstory.org. Or click to follow me, because I'm going to come back on a repetitive basis to explore a lot of different things that are part of that picture. It's an integrative picture of the human story that puts into an importantly different light both what kind of creatures we are and why our history has been as it has, and why the human world is as full as it is with brokenness, and what is the nature of the challenge that we have to face if human civilization is going to survive on this planet, rather than end our story in some self-inflicted catastrophe. Thank you. Bye-bye.